No one questioned the daughters' disappearances, until I found their journals. It began with a house that didn't belong to me. I inherited it after the death of an uncle I'd met once, maybe twice, in childhood. The kind of family member whose name barely makes it onto Christmas cards and funeral programs. The deed arrived in a flat yellow envelope, along with a short letter from a solicitor in Devonshire. The property has remained unclaimed since Mr. Felix R. Milgate's passing in 2014. It read, A's next of kin, you are entitled to assume ownership, should you wish. I almost threw it away, but something in the postscript caught my eye. Please note, there have been repeated break-ins reported by neighbors, though police found no sign of forced entry. The interior remains sealed. The house sat in the village of Dalry Wood, a place I'd never heard of and that no GPS recognized outright. After weeks of logistical back and forth with the solicitor, I took a train down, then hired a car. It was a gray March morning, the trees skeletal and the sky flat with cloud. The drive into Dalry Wood took me off the main road and down a thin track, nearly swallowed on both sides by tangled branches. A weathered green sign marked the entrance, its paint cracked, Dalry Wood. Ist. 17th village was small, maybe 40 homes at most, all of them older than I was by at least a century. The stone cottages leaned slightly, as if whispering to each other. Ivy had strangled most fences and windowsills. The air was quiet, too quiet for late morning. There were no children playing, no cars, not even birdsong, just an unnatural stillness, like the hush before a verdict. Felix Milgate's house was at the edge of the village, nearly encased in overgrown laurel hedges. A low iron gate groaned open with resistance, and the stone walkway was slick with moss. The house itself looked like something preserved in amber, untouched since the late 1970s, down to the warped white curtains that hung in the bay windows. The front door was bolted but unlocked. Inside, the air smelled like forgotten time mildew, dried paper, and old wood. It was the kind of place that had absorbed its memories into the walls. I came looking for answers about my uncle, why he'd died alone, why no one claimed the house. But what I found instead was a story no one had dared tell, the story of two sisters who vanished, not in a single moment of tragedy, but gradually, methodically, quietly enough that no one thought to raise the alarm. Their names were Isla and Marnie Hollow, and what happened to them still unsettles every night I've spent alone since. The journals were hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the upstairs bedroom. They were wrapped in old linen and bound with rough twine, 6 in total, each about 200 pages, handwritten in pencil and ink. The first dated back to 1974. The final entry was in 1979. Before I get into what they wrote, you need to understand the place they lived, and the people who surrounded them. Dalry Wood had always been a reclusive place. It wasn't just its physical isolation, but something deeper, older, the villagers prided themselves on, minding their own. As several of them would later tell me during brief, guarded interviews, many of them were families who'd lived there for generations. No one comes here unless they mean to, said Eleanor Redpath, a widow in her 80s who lived 3 houses down from Milgate's place. That's how it's always been. Isla and Marnie were born in 1966 and 1968, respectively. Their parents, Simon and Ruth Hollow, moved into Dalry Wood from Derbyshire in 1971. They were different from the villagers, bookish, private, overly polite. Simon was a schoolteacher, Ruth a painter who rarely left the house. According to census records, the family was listed as residing in number 14 Alder Lane for 8 years, until 1979. When both parents were declared deceased following what police described as tragic domestic event. The details of that event, I would later learn, were sealed for decades. But what disturbed me wasn't their deaths. It was the fact that no mention was ever made of their daughters, no missing persons report, no funerals, no trace. It was as though Isla and Marnie Hollow had never existed. The journals proved otherwise. Isla's handwriting was neat, almost formal. Marnie's slanted forward aggressively, as though impatient with the act of writing itself. The first entries are normal. Observations about the village, its strange silences, the way the neighbors never waved, comments about their parents, how mother rarely spoke and father locked himself in the study most evenings. But within a few pages, a tone begins to creep in, an unease. Subtle at first. February 17, 1975, Isla. Mr. Fenwick stopped me on the road today. He said, "You two ought not be wandering the lane so late." She doesn't like that. I asked who he meant. He just looked at the trees and walked away. March 1st, 1975, Marnie. We saw someone outside the window again. Not Dad. Taller. Standing near the garden wall for ages. I threw a stone and he didn't move. Just stayed there. When we told Mum, she said, "Ignore the watchers." Her hands were shaking. The term, watchers, appears repeatedly, more frequently as the months go by. By autumn of 1976, the entries are filled with anxiety. The sisters describe figures seen in the woods at night, villagers who appear to follow them, and strange rituals held near the chapel on the hill behind the village. I traced their references in local archives. There had been a chapel, St. Ethelrida's, but it burned down in 1943. Yet Isla's entries in 1977 mention people going oop to the chapel several times. She writes of hearing chanting bells and on one occasion screaming. The most unsettling entry I found came in early 1978, March 13th, night 78, Isla. Mrs. Darnell said the woods were thinnest tonight. She said we could go if we wanted, just to see. Mum locked the doors early. Dad said there want one of you. We didn't ask what he meant. Marnie held my hand all night. That same date appears in village council records I found on microfilm in Exeter's regional library. A special permit was issued for community observance in Dalry Wood. No specifics listed, no photographs, no media coverage. I drove back to the village the following week, unsettled and determined. I wanted to talk to someone, anyone, who remembered the hollows. Most doors stayed closed. One man, Kenneth Blake, eventually agreed to speak on record. He was 73, worked in forestry maintenance. His words still echo in my mind. They weren't supposed to stay that long, he said. The hollows. Families like that. They're meant to come and go. It's not safe otherwise. I asked what he meant. He wouldn't elaborate. When I told him about the journals, he went pale. You found those. You need to burn them. You need to forget them, girls. There's reasons no one talks about it. He refused to say more, but that single sentence, they're meant to come and go, stuck with me. Because that was the pattern. Reviewing the village census records from 1930 onward, I found several families who'd arrived with daughters between ages 6 and 10. In nearly all cases, the daughters disappeared from records within 5 years. No death certificates, no transfers, no explanation. By the time I reached the fourth journal, Isla's entries had grown more desperate. Her writing turned frantic, filled with drawings, trees, circles, eyes. Marnie's entries became shorter, more cryptic. There's one that reads simply, "Tonight's the last time. They chose me. Isla doesn't know. I won't let them take her." After that, Marnie's handwriting never appears again. The final journal, dated late 1979, contains only Isla's words. She describes waking alone, the house silent, her parents downstairs, unresponsive. She writes of wandering the village barefoot, asking for help. No one answers. Every door closed. In the final entry, she writes, "They took her. I stayed hidden. But now I think they know. The woods are thin tonight. I hear her voice." Then nothing. No one ever questioned the daughters' disappearances. Until I found their journals. And once I did, the calls began. Anonymous. Static filled. A woman's voice, faint, repeating the same phrase, "Don't stay past the thinning." I thought it was a prank. But things were already beginning to unravel. I didn't sleep the night I finished the last journal. The entries wouldn't leave me alone. The voices, the warnings, the sense that something terrible had been buried not just by time, but by choice. I stayed awake on the living room sofa of Millgate's house, half expecting to hear footsteps on the stairs. I didn't, but I swear I heard something move inside the walls. By morning, I'd made the decision to stay a little longer in Dalry Wood. I couldn't leave, not yet. The sisters had trusted those pages to be found. Someone had to listen. My Uncle Felix had been the village's unofficial record keeper, a retired librarian who'd spent his final years holed up in the house's cramped study, cataloging newspaper clippings, handwritten maps, and other documents that didn't exist anywhere else. I found dozens of file boxes, many labeled with red wax pencil, incidents unreported, outliers. Council correspondence, personal. Inside one labeled simply H, I discovered an undated letter written in careful cursive on aged paper. The signature at the bottom read, "R. Hollow. I am aware of the agreement." The letter began, "But they've asked too much. We came here in good faith and were promised sanctuary, not sacrifice. I will not let them take both girls. If anything happens to us, please know it was never voluntary." There was no envelope, no record of who it had been sent to. But tucked behind the letter was a page torn from a local newspaper, the Dalry Post, 1974. The headline read, "A traditional equinox gathering returns to Dalry Wood after 3-decade hiatus." I brought the clipping to Kenneth Blake the next day, the forestry worker who'd reluctantly spoken to me before. I met him outside the small repair shop he maintained near the southern edge of the village. He glanced at the paper, then handed it back without reading it fully. "Equinox gatherings are old tradition," he said. "Just song, fire, food. That's all it is." "But only the girls disappear," I said. Kenneth didn't respond. After a long silence, he muttered, "Ask the Morwicks." That name meant nothing to me at the time, but according to a record I found in the village registrar's office, the Morwicks were one of the founding families of Dalry Wood. Their names showed up again and again. Land deeds, church donations, and an entry from 1871 in which a council of 13 was established to preserve the seasonal order of Dalry. The family still lived in the village, in a tall, ivy-covered home that stood directly opposite the remnants of the old chapel hill. Their matriarch, Edith Morwick, agreed to speak with me, but only briefly and only under the condition I did not record our conversation. She was well into her 90s, seated in a wooden armchair near a cold hearth. The home smelled of lavender and something stronger metallic. Her eyes were milky but sharp. "You're not the first to come here looking for answers," she said. "But answers don't change the rules." "What rules?" I asked. She sighed. "There's a balance in places like this. The old kind, before courts and police. The Woods appetites always have. It's not cruelty, it's continuity. And the girls keep us." "Keep you how?" She didn't answer, just stared toward the window. I followed her gaze. The trees beyond it looked still, but I couldn't help feeling they were watching us both. "They weren't just taken," I said. "They were chosen." Edith looked back at me. "No, they were offered." That word, offered, clanged in my head like a dropped bell. I left soon after. She said nothing else. But as I closed her gate behind me, she called out softly, "You'll hear her again before the thinning." Thus I returned to Millgate's house with a growing sense of dread. I started cross-referencing the journals with the weather records Felix had kept. He'd been meticulous, tracking lunar phases, rainfall, and most notably, the solstices and equinoxes. Every year without fail he marked 4 days in red ink: March 20th vernal, June 21st midsummer, September 22nd harvest, December 21st longest night. I overlaid those dates with the journal entries. The disappearances lined up, the drawings in Isla's notebooks, circles within circles, eyes inside trees, crude diagrams of a chapel surrounded by 13 standing figures, suddenly made more sense. These weren't just sketches, they were records, rituals. A few nights later, on March 19th, I heard the voice again. This time it came not through the phone, but through the walls. A faint whisper, so close it felt like it was being breathed directly into my ear. "Don't stay past the thinning." I followed the sound, flashlight in hand. The old staircase creaked with every step. The walls were paper thin, and behind one of them, near the back of the upstairs hall, I discovered a hidden doorway. It led into a narrow space between the bedrooms. Inside, child-sized coats on rusted hooks, 2 pairs of boots, a crumbling dollhouse, and at the back, a window boarded from the inside. Scratched into the plaster beneath it were 3 words, "We are kept." I called the police that night, told them I believed there had been a cover-up, that 2 girls were missing, possibly murdered. The woman who answered sounded polite, but unconvinced. "The Hollow case was closed long ago," she said. "Their deaths were confirmed, but the girls weren't found," I said. There was a pause. "I'm sorry, sir, but the matter is not open to civilian review." The line went dead. 2 days later, I awoke to find the journals gone. Not moved, gone. No signs of forced entry, no broken locks. But they had been taken from beneath the floorboards, where I always kept them hidden. In their place was a single sheet of paper, handwritten, folded in 2. "You were warned. The Woods do not forget." I packed my bag that morning, planning to leave. I called a friend, told them I was coming back to London, that I'd stumbled onto something old and dangerous, and that I needed to get out. But then I remembered something. A note Isla had scribbled in the margin of her final entry. "If someone finds this, look in the old chapel root cellar. That's where they kept what was left of her." I didn't even hesitate. That same day, I walked to the northern hill, where the burned-out ruins of St. Ethelrita's chapel still stood like blackened teeth in the earth. Trees had nearly swallowed the place, but the foundations remained. Beneath the stone altar, hidden beneath soil and ash, I found it. The entrance was a rusted trapdoor sealed with a broken padlock. I pried it open. The air that rose out was not air at all. It was memory. Cold, wet, and thick with decay. I descended with a headlamp and a scarf over my face. The root cellar was about 15 feet below ground, carved from stone and dirt. Shelves lined the walls, old jars, wax-sealed bottles, and in the corner, what I initially mistook for a child's skeleton. But it wasn't. It was a straw effigy shaped like a young girl dressed in moth-eaten fabric. Around it were symbols, bones, candles long burned out, and something worse, a circle of 13 flat stones, each marked with a single name. I read them aloud. 12 of them matched the family names I'd seen in the census records, names of villagers still living in Dalry Wood. The 13th stone was blank. As I reached for it, I heard footsteps above me. I shut off the headlamp. I waited in complete darkness. No one came down. But when I climbed back up, heart pounding, I saw fresh footprints in the ash, leading away from the cellar. Someone had been watching me, or waiting. And that night, I understood what the villagers meant by the thinning. Because at exactly 20:13 a.m., the time Marnie's final entry was dated, the trees outside the house began to move even though there was no wind. And someone knocked on the window, not the door, the window, upstairs, where the girls used to sleep. I didn't answer the knock. I didn't even move. I just sat there in the dark living room, frozen, listening. The knock came again, 3 slow taps, then silence. I waited, every muscle in my body clenched, heart thudding like a war drum. I don't remember when I fell asleep, only that when I woke, the house felt wrong, not in the physical sense, but emotionally. The air was heavy, resigned, as though something had been decided in the night. I checked the upstairs window. No footprints, No sign of disturbance, but the wooden latch inside had been undone. I know I locked it. I remember turning it into place before sundown. Something had been here, or was still here. I decided I couldn't trust the house anymore. I packed the few things I hadn't already stowed and left. Not for London. Somehow I knew I wouldn't make it that far. I drove instead to the nearest city with a functioning library archive and began looking into the Morwick family. I needed to understand what Edith had meant when she said, "The Woods ask a price." I needed to know what it was they had offered, what they were still offering. There wasn't much online, almost nothing outside of scanned census documents and a few obscure references in folklore indexes, but buried deep in the Devonshire Folkloric Society's 1952 annual journal, I found a 6-page paper titled Observances of the Equinox in Isolated Moor Communities. Dalry Wood was mentioned by name. According to the paper, several villages in southern England once practiced a ritual offering during both the vernal and autumn equinoxes, supposedly to maintain balance with the land. The observance often centered around a symbolic sacrifice, effigies, mostly, or livestock, but in rarer accounts, the offering involved living representations of fertility, transition, or youth. One phrase stood out, repeated several times throughout the article. The thinnest nights belong to the forest, and the forest always remembers its debts. I read the sentence over and over again. The forest remembers. I thought of Marnie's voice echoing through the phone and the walls. I thought of the watchers, the eyes in the trees, the drawings, the villagers who turned away when I said the girls' names aloud. The forest didn't just remember, it demanded remembrance. That's when I received the call, a restricted number. This time, a man's voice, soft but with authority. He didn't introduce himself. "You've seen too much. We let you look because we thought you'd be smart enough to stop, but you've opened a door. You can't close it alone." "Who are you?" I asked. "You'll leave the journals. You'll write what you want. Call it fiction if you must, but you won't name the families. Not unless you want them knocking again." And then he hung up. I sat in the library for a long time afterward, staring at the phone, thinking about how many other voices had been silenced before they could speak. How many doors had been left unopened. I wasn't going to be one of them. That night, I returned to Dalry Wood, not out of bravery, but because I knew I had to see the forest one more time. The trees felt different this time. Alive in a way that defied logic. They breathed. They moved with a will of their own. I walked toward the ruins of the chapel, guided only by the weak glow of a crescent moon. Insects buzzed in the undergrowth. The air was damp and sour. I thought I saw someone ahead, among the birches, a girl barefoot, hair long and tangled, wearing a white nightdress. "Marnie," I whispered. She didn't move, but her mouth opened. "Isla stayed," she said. "She stayed so I could go." Then she turned and walked into the trees. I followed. We came to a clearing I hadn't seen before, even on the maps. A perfect circle of earth, untouched by roots or rock. In the center, 13 wooden effigies stood in a ring, weathered by time, some missing arms or heads, others leaning precariously. One was new. I approached it, my feet sinking into the soft loam. The effigy was shorter, dressed in cloth that had once been pink, now dulled by dampness and age. On its chest a name had been carved, Isla. I knelt. The ground beneath the effigy was uneven. I dug with my hands. The soil gave way to something hard, a wooden box soaked through but intact. Inside were bones. Small, human, a girl's hairbrush, 2 broken pencils, and a necklace I recognized from one of the journal's sketches, a pressed daisy encased in resin. Isla never left. Marnie had run, or been taken. But Isla had been buried here, as part of the ritual, perhaps not killed but used, sealed in the forest's memory, and the villagers had allowed it. I took only the necklace. I reburied the rest, said her name aloud, apologized to the wind, promised I would carry the story. But something heard me. The trees groaned. The air dropped 10 degrees in an instant. All around me, the forest exhaled. And I felt it, eyes. Not just watching, but what measuring. I fled. I don't remember the run back to the house. I only remember waking on the floor just before dawn, the necklace still clenched in my hand, my nails bloody from digging. The next morning, a letter was slid under the door. No envelope. It read, "You cannot keep what was offered, but you may keep her name." I left Dalry Wood for good that day. Drove until the trees thinned and the sky brightened. Every hour further from that place felt like another breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. But the story followed. Not in nightmares, though those came too, but in echoes, whispers in hotel hallways, children on trains with eyes too knowing, voices on the other end of silent phone calls. And the journal entries, they still appear, pages I never read before, scrawled across receipts, napkins, even my bathroom mirror once. She's still here. The Woods never let go. I scanned the necklace, placed it in a museum box and had it archived anonymously. The bones I reported to local police through a proxy, citing historical remains. I didn't want to be questioned. I only wanted Isla to be remembered. But I've learned something else since. Every year a new family moves to Dalry Wood, always with daughters. always around the equinox, and no one ever seems to leave. Not really, because Dalry Wood isn't just a village. It's a mouth, a memory, a bargain struck too long ago to undo. A place where silence is currency, and the forest never forgets what it's owed. And as for me, well, I carry the story now. Not for closure. There's no closure in things like this. Only witness. Only warning. Because if you ever find yourself driving through Devon, and the road narrows, and the trees start leaning inward, and the sign for Dalry Wood appears half rotted at the side of the lane, don't stop. Don't ask. And above all, don't stay past the thinning. It's been over a year now. Since Dalry Wood. Since the journals. Since the effigy in the forest whispered her name to me. I tell myself I left it behind. I sold the house, boxed up my notes, archived everything under a pseudonym. But you don't leave places like Dalry Wood. Not truly. Because they come with you. In silence, in shadow, in the still moments between sleep and waking. They follow you in your reflection, in the low hum of electricity in a darkened room. They follow you in the voices of girls who were never meant to be forgotten. I tried to publish what I found. I submitted an article, heavily redacted, to a regional folklore journal. I received a polite rejection with no explanation. When I pressed the editor, he replied, "Some places don't want to be remembered, and some stories are protected." A week later, the hard drive I'd stored the digital copies of the journals on was wiped. No trace. The IT technician I hired said it looked like someone had overwritten the files multiple times. "This wasn't accidental," he said. "Someone knew what they were doing." But I still had the physical copies, or so I thought. When I returned to the storage unit, I found it empty, clean. Not a single trace of the boxes. No sign of forced entry. The lock had been replaced with a new one I didn't put there. The management said I had vacated it 2 weeks earlier. I hadn't. All I had left was the necklace. Isla's necklace. I kept it in a sealed pouch, tucked inside a drawer I rarely open. But on the morning of March 20th, exactly 1 year to the day since I found the root cellar, I discovered it hanging from the rearview mirror of my car. I didn't touch it. Instead, I drove, not to Dalry Wood. I knew better than that, but to a police station in Tounts. I filed a report, said I believed someone had been following me, that my property had been tampered with, that people I'd interviewed in connection with a story were no longer responding to emails or phone calls. The constable was kind, but his face changed when I mentioned Dalry Wood. "You said you were investigating an old case there," he asked carefully. I nodded. "Don't." He didn't elaborate, just handed me my paperwork and said, "Some places are closed." So I turned to the only tool left to me. The story itself. I decided to tell it in the only way I could. Disguised, yes, but faithful. There are names I cannot include, locations I've blurred slightly, dates I've shifted by a year or two. But the events, the fear, the loss, all real. And it isn't just Dalry Wood. Since I began sharing what I found, I've received dozens of messages, emails from strangers, anonymous letters, each one describing places that sound almost identical, towns where children vanish slowly, where rituals are cloaked in local tradition, where the same 13 family names appear generation after generation. One letter from a woman in the Scottish borders described a girl who disappeared on the spring equinox in 1969. No body, no investigation. They called her a wanderer. The letter read, "But I saw the trees close around her. I saw them." Another email came from rural France. A man described his sister's disappearance during a solstice festival in 1973. He was 8. No one ever spoke her name again. "My parents wouldn't even acknowledge I had a sister," he wrote, like she'd been erased from them. In nearly every case, the stories shared two things: a wooded place and silence. I started building a map. Red dots for every message, every account, every reference to watchers, thinning, forest debt, or circle offerings. It's not just one village. It's not even just one country. It's a network, old as anything we know. Hidden behind the veil of folklore and myth, protected by generations who've learned that it's better to keep quiet than to resist. That surviving often means forgetting. But someone always remembers. Someone always writes. That's what Isla did. Her journals weren't meant to change what happened. They were meant to keep the memory alive, even if no one listened, so that the forest could not take everything. And neither will I. There's one final piece I've never spoken about, not publicly. The night I saw Marnie in the trees, when she turned and spoke, I recorded the entire thing. I didn't mean to. My phone was in my coat pocket, and the voice memo app had been left running. I discovered it weeks later, buried beneath hours of other field recordings. It's faint, almost unintelligible, but with headphones you can hear it. First my breathing, the crunch of undergrowth, a whisper, "Marnie," then silence, and then her voice, clear as anything. Isla stayed. She stayed so I could go. But just before the recording ends, another voice comes through. Not Marnie's, not mine. Low, male, ancient. "You should not have come back." 'Cause sometimes I wonder if that was meant for me, or just something the forest says to all outsiders who stay too long. because that's what this story is. It's a warning. And if you've listened this far, if you've felt the breath of cold leaves on your neck, if you've woken from a dream of being watched, if you've ever looked into the woods and thought you saw someone standing too still, too silent, then you know some places keep their dead, some places keep their daughters. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed by human hands. So when the trees thin and the wind falls quiet, remember this: the forest is patient, it remembers, and it is still waiting.